Hi, I'm Matt Williams. Welcome to Glimpses. My guest is a dear and longtime friend of over 40 years. She began her career as a volunteer usher at the Merrimack Regional Theater in Lowell, Massachusetts, and then went on to work in the entertainment industry for over 30 years, working her way up to head of casting for Universal Studios Television, where she oversaw the casting of all TV pilots and series. Some of the programs she has cast include Parks and Recreation, The Newsroom, Beekman's World, The Office, Friday Night Lights, and the list goes on and on and on and on. I am thrilled to have her on this podcast, Nancy Perkins. Welcome to Glimpses.
It feels funny, doesn't
It does. It's been, what, 40 years we've known each other?
I know.
Kind of grew up in the business together, right?
Exactly.
In fact, the first place we met was at Lowell, Massachusetts.
Yes, you were an actor doing one of the plays at the Merrimack Regional Theater.
This is so embarrassing. I was Dracula in The Passion of Dracula, which was the very first production.
It opened the theater, exactly.
Opened the theater, and you were a volunteer usher.
I was.
And I think it was the next play was where you met Ron?
My husband came in. He wasn't my husband at the time. Came in to do Glass Menagerie, which was about the fourth play.
So it was that same season.
Yeah, the first season.
And you met Ron, and the rest is history.
And I ran off to join the circus.
You ran off to join the circus.
That's what they say. That's what it felt like in my hometown. People, because it was so unusual. People I went to high school with, and so would run into each other and say, "Did you hear what happened to Nancy McLeod? She met an actor and moved to New York." Like like it was the wildest thing ever. Like I ran off to join the circus.
Well, from Lowell, that is.
Yeah,
it's like from Evansville, Indiana.
Yeah.
We both come from blue-collar towns.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like Oz. You ran off and lived in Oz.
And as a matter of fact, when I was young, I was infatuated with television and show business and all of that. And I genuinely believed and accepted that was not available to me.
Ah, yeah.
And it makes me sad now to think
it's out there or somebody else.
There was no path that led from me to that as far as I was concerned.
Right.
I think it's different now because of the internet and everything. I think kids now know about everything or can find out about everything and anything they're interested in. But back then, it was me and the TV guide.
But you met Ron and you two fell in love, got married, been married all these years, and you went to New York City. You lived in New York City for a while, and you lived at a place called Manhattan Plaza. And there's a documentary called Miracle on 42nd Street, and it's about the story of Manhattan Plaza. For those who don't know what Manhattan Plaza is, would you explain that? Because you and Ron lived, I remember vividly going to your apartment there when you first got married.
Yes, I remember you being there. It's a great place, and I'm so thankful for it. It was being built as a luxury apartment complex when New York went bankrupt or was teetering on bankruptcy. The famous Gerald Ford says, no, or whatever, when they were trying to get relief.
Yeah.
And so they had this not completed apartment complex in New York City.
Right on 42nd Street.
In Hell's Kitchen.
In Hell's Kitchen, right.
And so a bunch of very smart people got together and said, what are we going to do? And the theater owners got involved because it was so close to Times Square. And they decided that they would do an experiment of having subsidized housing for artists.
For artists?
Yes.
All artists or only theater artists?
It was, oh God, I'm not going to remember the exact number. And I produced the documentary.
I know you did.
It was like 75% artists, 15% people that were displaced from the neighborhood.
Right.
And 10% elderly.
Okay. But it was primarily artists, and it was an artist commune in essence. And in this documentary that you produced, you talk about all the people who lived there for a while. You don't have to go through the whole list.
No, but it was a lot. There were a lot of people. Angela Lansbury lived there. Tennessee Williams lived there for some of the
I
time
had no
lived
idea.
there.
Really?
Yes. And then people that weren't famous at the time, Giancarlo Esposito I knew in the building very
Right.
well, and Alicia Keys, who's in the documentary, was a child when I lived there.
Oh my
She
gosh.
lived with her mother in the other building.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So you and Ron, and I remember visiting you many times. You lived
Mhm.
there, and then it was the '80s, right? The early '80s. When did you
Yeah.
move to LA?
I moved to LA as 87 turned into 88, the
Okay,
beginning
so
of
you were
88.
there through the mid '80s, and then you moved out here,
Mhm.
'87, '88. And what was your first job in LA when you got out here?
Uh, I had been very fortunate because I worked at ABC in New York in the casting department. So I had met in those days.
How did you get that job?
Um, I
I mean,
had
come on, you're from Lowell. How
I
did you
know.
walk through the door? I'm from Lowell. I want to cast
Well, I
TV
had one
shows,
connection. A woman I worked with at the theater gave me the name of her friend that worked on a soap opera.
right?
And I called her, and I was so naive. I'm embarrassed to say this, that when I got to New York, I didn't call her right away because I wanted to get settled first before I got a job. Like, I thought she was just going to give me a job. And so I finally, after a few weeks, called her, and she was very nice. I think you might know her. Her name's Janet Blake. She worked
Yeah,
at Disney for a long time.
absolutely.
I called her and she said, yes, I hear you're great. And my friend told me about you. So she gave me some advice. She started saying, get a Ross report and look up the casting offices, send your resume. She was giving me all this. And as the conversation started to wrap up, I started to go, oh, she's just going to tell me what to do. She's not going to actually
Give you a job.
help me get a job. And she said, if I hear about anything, I'll let you know and call me if you get something. And by that time, I was just like, oh, okay. So, but she did. I started temping and stuff, but she called me after, and like a month went by or something. And she called me and said, are you still looking for a job? The casting director of one of the soaps here, her assistant, she mentioned the other day, her assistant left. And so that was my first job. And from that, I was able to turn that into going to ABC. But in those days, producers from LA, when they were doing pilots, used to fly to New York. The whole crew would come to New York to cast. Now
I didn't know that.
yeah. And so I met all these people, and I would kind of become their assistant because they didn't have an assistant with them.
Right.
So I was, getting their theater tickets and Xeroxing their sides and doing all that stuff. And so a few of them said to me, if you ever come to LA, call me, or
Right.
I want you to work for me if you come to LA. So when I moved to LA, I was lucky. I had about 5 or 6 people.
You had a network. And when you got to LA, what was the very first job you had in LA in casting?
Well, when I made my calls, this time I didn't wait that long. I called people within a few days. And one of the people I called was Gene Blythe, who we both know.
Yep.
And he said, you're here now? And I said, yeah. He said, you're in LA. I said, yeah. He said, and you live here? I said, yeah. He said, can you come over here tomorrow at noon or something? And again, they were looking for someone on one of the shows. And I went over. It was a temporary situation. Mary Tyler Moore was doing a new half hour.
Right.
And so I got hired as the associate. They were going to make 6 episodes or something.
Right.
So that was the first thing. And I went to MTM, which I had grown up,
MTM, of course. Mary Tyler Moore,
Yeah.
Grant Tinker, all those fabulous shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was thrilled to be on that
Now,
line.
for anyone who doesn't know, I think what most people know what a casting director does. But if anyone like from Lowell or Evansville doesn't know what a casting director does, just a quick summary of what you do as a casting director.
Well, most of my career, I've been a casting executive, which is a little different from being a casting director, but it's the same skills, I guess. A casting director is hired by a production to deliver the cast. You work with the producer, the writer, the director. You have meetings. You also have to talk to the network or the studio and see what their wants are.
Right.
And, you hold auditions, and your goal is that at the end, everybody is happy with
The casting.
As a studio executive, I oversaw the casting of all the shows. So each show had a casting director. You were very nice at the beginning to mention those shows, which I did work on, but there were also casting directors on some of those shows, The Office,
But
Allison
you were
Jones.
the boss who supervised
I
everyone.
actually would hire the casting director and
Right.
most of the time. And I went to the sessions and, just to make sure, because then I would go back in the studio and say, how's it going? How's the office casting going? Are they finding people? And so I was the conduit between the creative and the studio.
Okay, so in casting, I remember years ago reading Harold Prince's book. I can't remember which book this idea is in, but he said when he was casting like a musical or something for Broadway, he said when the actor left the wings, by the time they hit center stage, he knew if he was going to cast them or not. He just had a gut. And he said it was almost right. What was the it? Did you have that? Did you know when someone walked in, you go, they've got it?
I'm always a little skeptical about those kind of claims. I
Yeah.
mean, I've read
So
articles.
Harold Prince was full of crap, is what you're saying. Yeah. I mean,
Like,
please.
who is he?
Yeah.
I always read those articles in TV Guide about, the minute Bruce Willis read, we all jumped up. And I was like, I was in that room. Nobody jumped up. Everybody went, I don't know, do you think? Because, everybody's nervous. It's such a big decision. And especially the creative people. I mean, I've literally had people say to me, this is my kid's college education. If this is a hit, especially at the time you and I came up.
Yeah.
A hit was life-changing.
All right.
So I can tell you, there's times when you feel really good about someone through the whole process and you feel like it's going to be him. I know it's going to be him.
Yeah.
But one of the rare times I literally went, oh my God, we were casting a show for a producer for Sean Cassidy, who is now a writer, producer, the former pop star. I did a lot of shows with him. He had a long deal at Universal. And he was doing this kind of medieval show, and it was going to be filmed in Australia. So we asked them to put people on tape in Australia. And there was a young, dashing, leading guy for the lead. And the tape came from Australia, and the casting director and I were in my office, and I put the tape in, and this guy came up, and it was one of the few times in my life I just went, oh my God. And I looked at her, and and both of our eyes got really big, and I pulled the tape out of the machine, and we ran together down the hall. And it was Heath Ledger, and he got the job.
Wow. Okay.
He was a teenager. He was very
beautiful
young.
and a good actor.
Oh,
and
he just, like, you just couldn't take your eyes off him. It looked like he was looking at you.
What is that when the cliche is, oh, she's got it, he's got it. What is it? Can you define it?
Well, I feel like it's kind of the same thing as in life when you meet people. There's people you're just kind of drawn to.
Yes.
I use that expression a lot, actually, when I look at a bunch of actors on tape or something. I'll think, God, I feel drawn to that person, you know? And then you just hope that the audience, you start to trust that if you're drawn to them, maybe the audience is going to be drawn to them.
That is what people, I don't think, realize is it's so subjective. You are the eyes and the ears for millions of people. And if you go, I find this person compelling, I want to watch this person, then you're banking on those millions of viewers to do the same thing, right?
But it has to be you. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say this. I'm sure you say this about your writing. You can't do something saying, I think other people are going to like this.
Absolutely.
I don't like it.
No,
but I think other people are going to like it.
No, you can't do that. Right.
Because you just make yourself crazy.
Yeah. So when an actor or actress walks into the room, what is the best thing they can do and the worst thing they can do? What impresses you, first of all? What's the best thing an actor does? And so you and I are sitting in the office right now and somebody walks in, coach that young actor.
Well, obviously be prepared is one of the...
That would help. Memorize the lines if you can.
And, I think I heard, gosh, it'll come to me, my first blank spot in my brain, an actor saying the other day that he never minded auditioning because he always thought of it as, oh, I get to act today.
Oh, yeah.
Because as an actor, you get, so the percentage of time you actually are acting as opposed to all the other stuff, trying to get the job.
Right.
And he said, I always looked at it like, and then when I was done, and I walked out and I said, well, that was fun. I got to act today. And I think if you come in uh, feeling that way, it reads.
Well,
You're
you're glad to be
comfortable,
there.
and
The
you're
energy's
making
out.
people
Yeah.
comfortable.
Yeah.
Um, People have talked about this before. I hate to even talk about it because I have so much empathy for it. But when people come in who are kind of desperate for the job,
Yeah.
that reads too.
Yes.
And that's not as,
Yes.
you're not
That
drawn to people
I know that
as much.
that desperation, and the
And
more
I feel bad because I
and
understand the desperation.
yeah, and you stop looking at them as actors, and you're going, "Oh, please, it's going to be okay," right?
My husband said something interesting. My husband's an actor.
And a very good one, by the way.
Yes, he
He's in
is.
so many movies, TV shows.
But when we moved out here, we were talking about the difference between auditioning in New York and auditioning in California. And he said, the auditions in New York are so few and far between that when they come, like at that time, it's different now, but there wasn't very much television shot in New York.
Right.
So if you had an audition for television, it felt like, oh my God, man, if I got this, And so you sort of put too much on it.
Yes.
And when we came out here and he started getting multiple auditions in a week, he said, oh God, it's so much different. It's just one of the ones you're doing.
Right.
And when it's over, you walk out of the room and say, okay, I have another one at 4 today. I got to look at that. You kind of leave it behind. Where in New York, you go home and say, "Oh my God, this would change my whole life." Oh my God.
And also playing the tape. I should have read it this way. Why didn't I do it this way?
Yeah.
And the beating up. I don't know if you've ever been scared in an audition.
When I was young and an associate, and embarrassed easily, or more easily than I do now, I was like, people would like touch me, and I was in an audition
While
once.
reading a scene,
yeah,
you mean?
within the context of the scene,
Okay.
but still, one guy grabbed my boob one time, and it was because in the scene he slaps her across the face, or he does something to shock her, and so the actor just reached out and grabbed my boob, and he got the desired effect because I went like, "What did you just do?" And but then at the end, like I said, everybody was saying, "Thank you very much," and he's like, "Thanks a lot," and I'm like, "Yeah." So I had hung this sign in my office that said, "Please don't touch the reader," for a long time. That was kind of a joke amongst actors.
Oh,
But
yeah, the craziness. So you cast or supervised casting directors and cast a lot of comedies.
mm-hmm.
And I always, when I give speeches or I talk to my students, I go, I can't teach you how to be funny.
Mm-hmm.
You really can't. Either somebody's got the funny bone or they don't. What do you think that is? What is it about? Because you worked with Amy Poehler, you worked with you supervised the Office casting. These are the high end. This is like the A+ list of comedians and actors. What is it about them that makes them so funny?
I do think some people are just funny.
Yeah.
There's a theory that's discussed sometimes that, it used to be, there's a joke in show business, God doesn't give with both hands.
Yeah, God doesn't give with both hands.
He doesn't
yes.
make you beautiful and funny.
Right.
And there are certainly a lot of people that are very attractive who are very funny. But the theory used to be that they didn't need to be funny. When they were younger,
because they were so attractive.
Because they were getting
Doors
attention.
opened.
Yeah, they were getting attention. They were getting praise.
Right.
They were getting affection. And they didn't need to earn it by being funny.
Right.
That is probably true for a percentage.
Yes.
But there's certainly a lot of very attractive people that are funny.
Sure.
And then there's people that just are staggeringly funny.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve Carell is just hilarious.
Yeah.
And Amy Poehler's hilarious.
Yeah.
Maya Rudolph's hilarious. These people are really funny.
I think it's just they think funny. I think they think funny thoughts, and they don't have to necessarily deliver bada bing jokes.
Right.
They could say, that's a water bottle, and make it funny. And I think there's some wavelength in their brain that makes them that way.
I mean, I remember with Steve Carell, he had done, I think, Anchorman. No, the one with Jim Carrey. The one with Jim Carrey.
Ah, yes.
And so we knew we had this Office casting coming up. It was like this weight over my head that we had bought the rights to the British version.
Right.
And everywhere I went, people said, "Who's going to play the Ricky Gervais part?" People asked me that hundreds of times.
Right.
And I would say, "Oh, we'll see." And then I would feel like panicked. But we had Steve Carell come in for a meeting, uh, and the meeting was so much fun and so funny. He was shooting Anchorman, I think, and he was telling us about some of the, outtakes and
Right.
stuff. And he kept saying, we're so stupid. We're just being so stupid. And when he left, you just felt like, oh, I would love to spend more time with that guy.
Right.
I would love to be around that guy. And I think that's probably a good indication of a series
I
lead.
think that's the key to television. And I really do, is that you get to hang out in the office. You get to hang out in Pawnee, you get to hang out at the Cheers bar or whatever. You just like spending time with these people because they're fun.
Yeah.
And so I'm not looking for gossip or dirt, but who have you discovered, or who did you pick out of the crowd? Is there somebody that other people said, I'm not sure about that one, but you went, that's going to be somebody?
The example that always comes to mind is the one I gave you earlier, the Heath Ledger thing,
yeah.
because it was so immediate and sort of.
I guess I was thinking more in the comedy. Is there anybody else in the comedy world? Because you cast a lot of half hours.
I know. Not that I had to fight for or anything. I mentioned Maya Rudolph. I met Maya personally through Bruce Paltrow.
Okay.
Her dad and Bruce were best friends.
Okay.
And Bruce had called me and said, "Would you meet my friend's kid and stuff?" And she came in for a meeting and everything. And I remembered her. And then we were casting a pilot. And there was, in those days, what was very common, the two leads and then the two friends.
Right.
And she was, so there was a part of a friend. And we had her come in and read. And she wound up getting it. And it didn't actually go anywhere or anything, but it was her first kind of TV gig. And we were at the network, and they did the test, and they were all waiting in the hall and stuff. And so I just remember that I said to everybody, "Can I tell her?" And they said, "Yeah." And I waited for everyone to leave, and I went down the hall, and I said, "Let's call your dad, because you got it." And we were like running down the hall together and stuff. So I have fond memories of people that were unknown then. I'm not thinking of anybody that, like.
But Rainn Wilson, was he known at all, or some of these other?
He had done some stage work in New York that people had seen, and I had seen him and met him. And then he did an arc on 6 Feet Under, if you remember that show.
Yes, absolutely.
And we all knew him from that.
Okay.
But you know what's funny? Allison Jones, a brilliant casting director, did the Office casting. And we both can remember the first session really clearly. And both Jenna and Rainn came in the first session.
Mm.
And then John Krasinski went on tape in New York, and we saw that. But it's just funny. We both always remember that very first day, we both felt like, oh, these two could be it.
Yeah, something happened that day.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned going to the network. I don't think people realize that the casting executive or director sometimes is the middleman or person between, because the director has their favorite, the producers may have their favorite, the network has their favorite, and the person who's casting is caught between those two worlds.
Yeah.
And I've been in many situations through the years, 36 years in TV, of where it gets really political, it gets acrimonious. How did you handle the politics of that?
When I became a studio executive or casting executive, it's funny to think now, I was hesitant about taking it. And it's the same thing as me thinking the woman's going to call me with a job.
Yeah.
But I said to Ron, I hear creative people talking about the suits and the suits came down to the set. And I said, I don't want to be one of those people.
You don't want to be a suit.
I don't want artists to perceive me as that. And he said to me, which was very wise, he said, well, why can't you be the one who's different? Because obviously there's a need for the one who's different. So what I tried to do, and it took some juggling, but I think I got pretty good at it. You need to, the people at the studio are paying your salary. They're your boss.
Yeah.
There has to be, but I tried to be an ally to the talent and not ever please my boss at the expense of the talent.
Yes.
And sometimes they were different, had different opinions about what should happen.
Okay.
But I would try to go back and forth
Well, you're
between them.
married to
An
an
actress.
actor.
That
You
did
were
help.
around the act. You were around theater people. You lived in Manhattan Plaza.
I was very drawn to creative people, and I've always have been.
Knowing the few times I've seen you work, and you're nurturing without pandering to the artist, and you're nurturing. You make them feel secure. You're kind of, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, kind of their cheerleader, because
I try, yeah.
yeah,
I try very
you boost
much.
their ego and let them know they're good. And encourage them. So
I try to be an ally, and I think a lot of them would say that I was an ally. I used to say to them sometimes when we were really at a crossroads, when they would say, "Oh, but I don't want to cast her. I want to cast her, but the network wants her, and the studio wants her, and everybody wants." And when we did finally come to a conclusion, I would always say to the producer, if at the end of this you're not happy, then I have failed.
yes,
I don't feel that this is a successful endeavor if at the end of it you're not happy. And usually they would come around, or sometimes I would try to get the studio or the network to come around to
Right.
their thinking.
Did you ever make a mistake? Did you ever fight for someone and then they get on the show and tank, or they're just not good? And you go, wow, I didn't see that coming?
The examples that come to mind are more, uh, there was a couple of times I fought and didn't win. I fought and sometimes I look back on those, and even though they happened a long time ago, and I'll think, God, maybe I should have fought harder for that. I
Mhm.
don't know. There was a pilot we were doing for NBC, and they were still very much in that everybody has to be pretty and sexy and hot because they had so much success
I
with
call
that.
it cookie cutter casting, where, just change the hair color, they all look alike,
Do you remember that one time, DJ, get ready, you may have to cut this too. There was a time when NBC did this thing where they made it all one night. Like they had Friends and Caroline in the City and Seinfeld and something else. And so they wrote a night that they were all set in New York.
Yes.
They wrote a night and they said, we feel like what we want is for the audience to just feel like one goes right into the other. And that, for the whole night, and I remember a writer producer saying to me, what are you talking about? What? There are 4 different shows. You can't write shows so that they bleed into each other or something. But they had so much success with good-looking people and
Yeah.
hot, sexy comedies and stuff.
Right.
And we were doing a show about a mother who was harried. A young mother just gave birth, has a 2-year-old, the husband's at work, and I'll say who Busy Phillips. Do you know that
Yes.
actress?
Busy Phillips.
Gave a fantastic reading. She was hysterical. And at the end, they made us cast this like hot woman. And I said, you think the harried mothers at home are going to look at this woman who looks like a supermodel and say, oh, yeah, she knows just how I feel. All right, I can really relate to her. But what's staggering to me was the producer, who was a woman, the creator. I kept saying, no one's gonna. It's not authentic. She's not. And she saw how much the network wanted the hot woman,
Uh-huh.
and she said, and I'm not implying Busy Phillips isn't hot because she is.
No,
but
no,
this was
but
a very,
You're talking someone who's
model-esque.
more authentic versus
A
yes.
model.
Yeah.
And the producer said, please don't fight this anymore. I want the show to get on the air.
And did it get on the air?
No.
Okay, there you go. I think that right there is kind of the biggest lesson of Hollywood, isn't it? Because there's so many voices. Hollywood, and rightfully so, runs on fear, right?
Yeah.
I could lose my house. If this doesn't work, I can't send my kids to college. Fear drives every decision, and my brother-in-law has a saying. He says a lot of times what the networks will strive for is perfect mediocrity,
Mm-hmm.
where it's right down the
It's the
middle,
least
the
offensive to
least
everybody.
offensive, and if that's what you want, pre-digested food, that's fine. But when you take the chance to cast some of these people and break out, and I think it's changed drastically though
Yeah, yeah,
since you got out here, because when you look, first of all, at the whole streaming service and all the
yeah.
cable and network, there's such a diversity in the best sense across the board.
The era, one of the eras I went through, which was so infuriating, was uh, you'd get a script for a comedy, and it was a romantic comedy
Right.
usually, a male and female lead, and the description was always this: he's good looking in a Tom Hanks kind of way, and a kind of an average guy but charming, and you'd say okay, and you'd read a few of that, and then she enters. She's hot as can be. The steam is coming off her. Their mouths drop open. And so the women, we'd always say, why does she have to be so much hotter than he is? And that was always
Because men were
the
writing those
case.
series.
And honestly, we were at the network once, and the casting director, we were casting one of those kind of situations, and the casting director innocently said, oh, I just don't understand. Why she's so much prettier a woman than he is good looking a man. So why and how can she not be good looking enough for him or something? And the president of the network got very offended,
Ooh, okay.
like
Okay.
left the room.
Okay.
Like I think saw himself as somebody that was, very liberal and open minded and progressive, and she had to write like a note saying I apologize.
Wow. Okay. So I'm a young actor, and I come to Nancy and I go, Nancy, what advice do you have to give to me?
Oh my God. You know, I haven't been working since COVID started.
Right?
And one of the main reason is that it has gone remote.
Self
You know,
tape.
we've
And
talked about
explain that to the audience, because I hear this from every actor friend and acquaintance I have talking about self tape. Could you explain that?
there has always been some self-taping done, but usually the casting office has sessions and has actors come in
Right?
and read. A few years back, or many years back, those sessions mostly started to be taped.
Right.
But for certainly the callbacks, the producer and writer, director, whoever would be in the room. Um, Sometime having seen the first tapes and saying, these are the people I want to see again, or sometimes that was up to you of
Right.
who, but it would be in person. When COVID started, everybody was trying to figure out how to make this work and said, all right, the actors should tape themselves at home, put themselves on tape. You can use your phone or whatever, and just email the audition to us. And
So, and just to be clear, I'm at home by myself with a phone or a camera, remember, and doing a scene, pretending you're there, but obviously I'm doing it alone. So you're acting for the other person as well, and you're putting yourself on tape.
and in the case of my husband, your wife is reading with you. The dog is barking. The garbage truck just pulled out outside the window, and we're both like, "Oh dear God." But yeah, and so there's plus and minuses to this. If you polled people, I think you'd get very different reactions.
Right.
The positive is, and my husband would be the first one to say this. I said to him, "Well, look at it this way: you don't have to put on a suit in 90-degree weather and drive to the valley and wait in a room to go in and read a scene."
Right.
Um, but I knew from the beginning it was going to catch on because I've heard too many producers complaining about sitting on the 405 for an hour on their way home last night after
Right.
watching auditions. And I said, when everybody figures out that they can just watch these tapes in the comfort of their West Side office or their
With a
home
glass
or
of wine
whatever,
and your feet up. Yeah.
like we're never getting them back in there.
Right.
Some actors like not having to go. And one of the other things this is changing the business, is now you can live anywhere. you don't have to say, people moved out of LA saying,
Right.
well, I'll just tape myself, and if I get it, I'll fly in. Um, the negative, of course, is you're not getting direction. You're not getting, having a conversation with the director. You're not
About the
getting to
character,
ask
the
what.
situation, the
He's
theme of
not
it.
getting to say, oh, no, 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 he's not, that's not how he came into. So, but for me, the biggest negative is just the lack of human connection.
Yeah.
That's really,
But what about, because so much of casting, and this is the ineffable element, chemistry. And you have this man, this woman, this child, this, whatever, and you put them together, and all of a sudden there's a chemistry there.
yeah.
And how in the world can you, unless you see them on a video and invite them into the room? And I've had callbacks that are a chemistry test to see if the people, and there is that ineffable thing that happens and go,
Yeah.
wow, those two people have chemistry. And that's something you can't write or manufacture.
Or you say, oh my God, he made her better.
Yeah.
Or she made him better.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's always an exciting thing to see, too. I think, based on what I've heard from people, that people are starting to have, final callbacks are in person.
Okay.
Or chemistry reads that you just mentioned are in person. Because, yeah, you don't want to cast two people that are going to be playing opposite each other.
Yeah, they don't have
and
to
they've
like
never
each other
met
as
or
long as
something.
there's chemistry there.
Yeah.
There's that little crackly thing that happens when there's.
But there's a deeper thing happening that makes me really sad and makes me happy that I had my career when I had my career.
Right.
And that is, the same thing is happening between agents and casting people and studio people and network people and actors. Nobody talks anymore. Everybody just texts each other or messages each other or emails each other. I was doing a job a few years ago, a consulting job, and I said to my assistant, go find out if, Angelina Fiorelisi is available for this. And they were gone a little bit, and they came back in and said, oh, no, she's doing a movie. I said, oh, did they say, is it the movie she was going to do in Greece? Because I heard that got pushed. And she looked at me for a minute, and she said, well, I didn't talk to them. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I texted, is she available? And they texted back, no, she's doing a movie. And I said to her, you guys are never going to form the relationships that I have formed over the last 30 years.
Right.
There's agents and managers and casting directors that I've been talking to for 30 years.
Yeah.
So if somebody comes in on that same job, somebody came in and said, oh, we have a problem with this actor on a show and this is happening. And I said, who's the manager? And they told me the name, and it was someone who I've known forever.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll be right back. And I went and called her. I said, what's going on? She said, oh, it's you. Okay. But
Yeah.
tell each other the truth, whatever. And I came back into the room and I said, I just talked to his manager. It's going to be fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. And it was like I did magic or something, like I did voodoo or something. They said, what do you mean? What did you do? What happened? And I said, that's what happens when you know someone for 30 years.
Yeah.
When you talk to someone for 30 years and do business with someone for 30 years.
Yeah.
There's a shorthand, there's a trust, there's all that kind of
That
stuff.
personal.
And I feel like people aren't going to have that going forward as much,
Right.
because they're not really talking.
That's.
But I guess that's
so ironic.
That's sort of what's happening
Everywhere.
in society.
The whole irony is there's this whole loneliness epidemic in America where that they're declaring like it's an epidemic, that people are so lonely, which is so ironic because we have more ways of talking and communicating.
than ever.
But it's not face to face over a cup of coffee. Let's talk about this character, or like you said, even the casting. You're not in the room and going, no, let's make an adjustment. Let's try it this way. That's
when my assistant would roll their eyes or something, the way you do it a boss, all right, I'll do it again or whatever. I would say, hey, I did everything you're doing, every single thing, without a computer.
I had to chisel it in a piece of stone with another rock.
I mean, when I think back on it now, it's kind of staggering, but we put out all the appointments by phone.
Well, you used the word Xerox, the sides earlier, and you go, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Staying till 10 o'clock at night to make scripts, standing in front of the copy machine.
That's funny.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think there was also without the technology, I think there was a resourcefulness too that might be missing from people coming up today. You had to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
If your boss said this script has to be in LA tomorrow, if it's not, we're all fired. We're all dead. You couldn't email the script to LA.
Right.
So you just had all these plans and backup plans, and we had the number of FedEx at the airport so we could, if we missed the last pickup, just all this crazy stuff.
You were resourceful.
Because we were resourceful. You figured out how to get scripts to people. I walked through snowstorms in New York to bring scripts to people's apartments because the messengers weren't delivering, and you just did it.
You sound like the pioneer of casting.
I sound so old-timey. I sound like I'm talking about vaudeville. When I was in vaudeville, we used to $20 a night, 6 shows a night.
Well, we're here because of glimpses, and by glimpses, it's little glimpses of God, and by that, I mean glimpses of kindness or unexpected compassion or tenderness. Do you see glimpses in your daily life?
Oh, gosh. I see glimpses all the time. I try to make myself be open and aware to it. These videos online is a rabbit hole I can go down, the positive ones,
Yes.
the kindness and the helping and everything. And I saw one just the other day. It doesn't have to do with show business or anything, but it was a little film of women playing soccer somewhere overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the women was had a headscarf on, was Muslim and had a headscarf on. And in kind of kicking and bumping against the player, it came unraveled and it started to come off. I could actually cry talking about this. And the girls, including the opposing team, without any call for help or signaling, all ran over and made a circle around her and huddled over her so that she was not visible to the crowd while she fixed
Her
headscarf. And like I said, she didn't look at anybody and say, help, what am I? It was like spontaneous. Just all in her linked arms, leaned over like in a huddle, and she emerged a second later with her headscarf on. And I just thought, yeah. Let's go with that.
I think once we become attuned and kind of wake up and look around, there's so much. Yes, dark world, wars raging.
God, right now.
Right now, that's why we have to cling to those moments of kindness to keep us sustained, to keep us going.
We have to, because as much now as any time I can remember,
right,
it can feel so hopeless, and sometimes the only thing that keeps you going. Mr. Rogers, I always remember this too. Mr. Rogers used to always say, "Look for the helpers."
Yes,
remember? And I think it came from a woman asking about, had he already passed? No, about 9/11. I feel like it's tied to 9/11 or something, and or some tragedy, and saying, "I don't know what to tell my kids. I don't know what to say to my little kids." And he said, "Tell them to look for the helpers, that there's always helpers." And
that's true.
And so, I saw a little news story the other day of someone in Gaza or something, helping someone. And I thought, look for the helpers, look for the helpers.
Look for the helpers. And if you can, be one of the helpers.
Ideally.
Yeah.
For sure.
Nancy, you are a dear friend, and I thank you for taking the time to come in here.
I'm flattered that you invited me.
Oh, are you kidding me?
As I said to you in the email, I'm not that interesting a person.
Yes, you are. And the audience is going to know that you are. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that's it for this podcast of Glimpses. And as you go about your day, take the time to look around and catch a glimpse. My friends, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Glimpses. Speaking of, Glimpses is now available for purchase at your online retailer of choice. And the best part? Every penny earned will be going to charities who support children in need. You can get your copy in the link below. The discipline that it takes